Today we need to talk about what could be a massive part of an upcoming update to Wizard101. So yesterday, one of the devs that works on the game, Rapier, talked about upcoming Arc 3 shadow spells. So this is confirmed that we are going to be getting new shadow spells. If I had to speculate, it's probably going to be spring update. And you might be wondering, what are these concept spells that you put in the thumbnail and why are they Imperia based? But that's because Arc 3, right? When you're talking about that in terms of like, you know, the Wiz plot, you're talking about the worlds from Polaris all the way through Imperia. And we've already gotten shad spells for Polaris and Mirage before. For some reason, they skipped Imperia all those years back when this world came out, and it looks like they're going to be going back and they're going to be adding a bunch of new shads for every school. I think we're going to get new spells based on Mallory, the Bat, maybe Grandfather Spider, Grandmother Raven, and the Triton. There are literally a lot of possibilities here, but I also think that all the changes that they've done up to this point actually make a shadow spell update very, very interesting. I think shadow spell updates in general have been a little bit divisive at times, mainly because of the fact that some people really want AoEs, some people really want single hits. And very often, right, an update where maybe Fire will get a spell like Raging Bull, another school will get a spell that's maybe a single hit, and you'll actually feel like you missed out depending on whether you got an AoE or not and how you play the game. But since that time where shads used to come out, they've actually created a new system where you can basically make a spell be an AoE, but you could also have it do as good as a single hit if you have one target. And what I'm talking about is basically that symbol right there. And what we've seen is that the top path will be a more traditional AoE generally, but the bottom path, it can be a single hit. It could be balanced like a single hit, while also being able to split for damage and things like PvP and other forms of advanced content. So this might actually be the first shadow spell update in years. If you haven't played in a while, this is going to be the first shadow spell update in years where probably every spell that every school receives will actually be usable regardless of whether you're PvE or PvP. The other aspect of this that I think a lot of people probably are going to miss on the, you know, the first overview of this announcement, what Wiz has started to do is they've started to make it so that every time you finish an arc, there seems to be a big power increase. Now, this wasn't always the case, but I think the biggest like example that everyone will agree is at the end of Arc 1, right? Every single school gets a very, very powerful AoE that it's basically usable for the rest of the game. And fun fact about the rank 7 spells from the end of Arc 1, they all are given quite a decent bonus, especially in PvE, where they do actually more damage than what a spell of that pip value would be expected to do. At the end of Arc 2, we get an actual introduction to shadow enhanced spells itself, a gigantic power increase. I'm wondering if they're going to keep that same energy for the end of Arc 3, which is what Imperia would be, and that's basically what I assume these spells are going to be based off of. What I would really like to see them do is maybe combine something with maybe shads and school pips. Maybe that's a crazy idea. I get it if it is nuts, but I feel like maybe if you just did that, especially if you made the top path an AoE that PvE players could still use in a super big power increase. I don't know, I feel like combining shads and school pips, which is something that I think is inevitable, it's gonna happen at some point, but that could unlock some possibilities where maybe every school can unlock new features both in PvE and PvP. I feel like that type of power increase would really fit in with all the things they're doing with spell fusion, arch mastery, all of that. And I think it's safe to say that people at least know how school pips kind of work now, especially because of Wallaroo AoEs. This is something that's widely used, first round hits. They all use a school pip, so now I feel like more people are on board with it. I think that would be really, really cool. If they don't go that route, I do think it is very safe to assume it's the end of arc spell. They're adding it like, you know, retroactively. I think they're gonna give themselves a wiggle room to make these spells just a little bit above the valuation that you would expect. The other thing that I really, really hope that they actually end up doing is also go back to the other shad spells that they have not changed yet in terms of like making them usable in both PvE and PvP. There's a lot of examples of this. One is like, you know, a spell like Sound and Musicology, right? This is an incredible PvE spell. They shouldn't touch the top path at all. But the bottom path, this is like, I think the whole gimmick of this is one, it's 2 shads because you need every shadow enhanced spell, I think, to be 2 shads when it comes to advanced content. But even though it's 2 shads, it's still balanced like an AoE, meaning it takes a gigantic damage hit, even though it's 2 shads and 5 pips as a storm spell. What they would do is make this a divide spell or whatever, so it would, you know, have a damage drop off with more targets. But if it was a single target spell, it would still be like valued like a single target hit. I think that's what they need to do. They've already kind of done this with some spells, but kind of been a little unfinished with it. Hopefully they have time to do that as well. But what could end up happening is not only might we get a bunch of new like Arc 3 shadow spells, we might also see more shad spells that are able to be used in more like, you know, 1v1 scenarios, not just in PvP, in both. I think the big question that, you know, obviously we'll get answers as we go, but this is something that I think has also been in discussion for a while. This idea of 1 shad versus 2 shadow pip spells. You guys are probably looking at bottom pad sound and musicology and you're wondering why in the world is it no PvP if it's 1 shad and it's only allowed in PvP if it's 2 shad? It's because otherwise spells that are actually balanced towards being single hit targets, they become extremely overpowered, even when you adjust for, you know, maybe they require 1 less shad so they'll do a little bit less damage, or you might get shads less frequently, right? That's kind of what they've been doing. They've either messed with how often you get shads or just how many shads a spell is to try to balance it. But the second you make the no PvP version of this allowed in PvP, you start running into crazy balancing issues. But I think regardless of how good of a fix it is in PvP, it still feels very foreign for a lot of people that, you know, grew up with this game and, you know, lived through the introduction of shads. They saw a single shadow pip, shadow enhanced spell, right? It's very odd for them, I think, and I think that's very valid, to see people using 2 shadow pips for 1 hit. And especially since then, there are other spells that are way meta that only require 1 shad spell, Dark Surge being the really big example of. I'm wondering if these Arc 3 shadow spells are gonna be 1 shad, and maybe they're gonna be more utility oriented if they are allowed in PvP, so they're not stupid dumb when it comes to damage. Or are they gonna revisit this idea of 2 shads versus 1 in itself, so the actual transition from PvE to PvP or any other form of, like, you know, transition from one activity to another doesn't feel like such a hassle. I think that is something that they're gonna have to do in the long term. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I actually think most shads are balanced at 2 shads. I don't think PvP is in a bad spot right now, but I can't help but wonder if something that holds back people from doing things that are, you know, maybe just a little bit more complicated than AoE and PvE is because, you know, their spells aren't the same. You know, like when you have 2 shads versus 1, it doesn't feel the same. It feels like, oh, that's another thing I gotta get used to. Hard question to solve. Hopefully if they do address it, they don't like re-break PvP, because that would be, I think, pretty off. I think the big takeaway of this video, in the comment alone, you might have noticed, they're still in the planning stages of these. So if y'all have any ideas for what you want your school to get in terms of an Arc 3 shadow enhanced spell, let me know in the comments. I'm sure the devs are going to be reading this, or if you want to tell them more directly, go to the Discord, give them y'all's ideas. I feel like the best updates always come when there's a lot of feedback, so hopefully, since we have all the time to do this, might as well give them feedback on what we want all these new shadow enhanced spells, the ones that they're going to be adding for the first time in years, what we want them to look like. I look forward to reading all of y'all's comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon, and yeah.